Greetings, my friends. We are all interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. And remember, my friends, future events such as these will affect you in the future. You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here. And now, for the first time, we are bringing you the whole story of what happened on that fateful day. We are bringing you all the evidence, based only on the secret testimony of the miserable souls who survived this terrifying ordeal. The incidents, the places. My friends, we cannot keep this a secret any longer. Let us punish the guilty. Let us reward the innocent. My friends, can your heart stand the shocking comic book adaptation of Plan 9 from Outer Space? Yes, someone actually adapted freaking Plan 9 from Outer Space into a comic book. And looking at the cover, our eyes are immediately drawn to either the bulbous, glowing head of Tor Johnson, which is a pretty good rendition of the super Swedish angel, if I do say so myself, or the rather curvaceous Vampira, who is smiling for some reason, despite her being completely emotionless in the entire movie. Weird. And this comic also has to boast the tagline, "The worst movie of all time." And I just gotta laugh at that. They're actually bragging about how this is the worst movie of all time, as if that's actually some kind of a selling point. Well, then again, I suppose since movies are actually moving pictures and comic books tend to be rather stationary, I suppose this just might be the worst movie ever made. Also, something else that's interesting about this cover. We all know how Plan 9 features the last on-screen appearance of horror legend Bela Lugosi before he met his demise, and of course we all remember Lugosi for playing Dracula. The person depicted here doesn't really look so much like Lugosi as much as he does Carlos Valerius, the guy who played the title role in the technically superior Spanish Dracula. Our story begins with that ever-poignant bit of Ed Wood narration that I won't bother going over since, well, you already heard it a minute ago in all of its ridiculous over-the-top glory. And for some reason, Criswell looks like he's being played by Liam Neeson. After he introduces us to the shocking facts about grave robbers from outer space, Plan 9 from outer space, we're then treated to a 2-page spread of all the horrors that await us. Vampira, with even more ridiculously long nails than she should have, the giant Tor Johnson rising up in front of an even more giant tombstone, and Bela Lugosi, with a cape flapping in the wind so dramatically you think he ripped it right out of Spawn. And for some reason, he's blonde. Art goof, or a subtle nod to how they actually had a stand-in for Lugosi's character through most of the movie. You make the call! And in the background, we see the Legion of Doom flying around. I guess this is going to be our flying saucer, as opposed to the classic silver flying pie plates depicted in the movie. Darn it. And of course, we see the credits for this comic written in the tombstones, just like in the movie. Cute. Criswell continues to narrate about the passing of Lugosi's wife. After she's buried, the gravediggers hear a strange sound. To their horror, a hand bursts out of the grave that they just filled in. And this is as good a spot as any to talk about the art here. It's a huge step up from the imagery of the movie itself, and it actually looks a lot like the old pulp comics that inspired it to begin with. One of the biggest visual criticisms that the movie gets is a distinct lack of visual depth, but not in this comic. The illustrators present put a lot more thought into the composition of each scene than Wood himself could. And while this certainly works for this scene, I personally think it's a little much for this next scene coming up. After the gravediggers are killed off panel, we then see the old man who simply can't cope with his wife's death, as it becomes greater and greater agony. While the comic rightly improves on a lot of problems with this movie, I personally feel they should have been a little bit more faithful in their adaptation of this scene. I'm a big fan of Tim Burton's Ed Wood movie, And while I know it took a lot of liberties concerning the details of Ed Wood's life, I like to think that the events of Wood and Lugosi shooting this scene are more or less accurate. Wood doesn't have any idea what he wants to shoot, but all he knows is that he has to get something of Bela on film while he's still alive. He has some ideas about what might work, but Bela offers some of his own ideas. Neither of them know what the end result is going to be, but regardless, here we have two artists who are just trying to make the best scene that they can. As simple as this scene ended up being, I still really like it for being the culmination of these two friends giving all that they can for each other. And now, when they do this scene in this comic, not only is the composition all switched up in an admittedly more dynamic way, but he's not even wearing the hat and cape that we see him wearing in the movie. And like Spanish Dracula, just because it's technically better, that doesn't necessarily make it actually better. And since he's not wearing his cape, there's no reason for him to be wearing it after he's buried, as we'll see in the rest of the comic. But yeah, Lugosi's killed in what is more obviously a car accident, and he's later buried inside of a crypt that actually looks like it might be large enough to accommodate his mourners. And said mourners are horrified to find the somewhat more graphically mangled bodies of the gravediggers. We then cut to our young hero, Jeff Trent, as he's flying a passenger jet with the finest wood paneling available. They're about to radio for landing instructions, as a flying saucer races by. What in the world? No, Edie, it was nothing from this world. Did this comic just try to make that line sound badass?
That's nothing from this world.
We then see Inspector Daniel Clay, played by Tor Johnson, investigate the murder scene at the graveyard. He decides to look around a while, and we're spared the unnecessarily dialogue about him getting flashlight from patrol car, and how he's a big boy now, Johnny. Yeah, he's a big boy. In other news, the Earth continues to revolve around the sun. While he's looking around a while, the lieutenant observes the bodies. Looks like a bobcat tore into him. Which actually does make quite a bit of sense, considering how they were killed by a woman with freakishly long nails. But in the movie, their bodies looked more or less pretty intact, and in the comic here, they don't bother making them look even more slashed up. So what is he looking at? We then find Jeff back home, which is just adjacent to the cemetery, and he's talking to his wife Paula about his flying saucer encounter. What's interesting is that they cut out the dialogue where he describes it as looking like a huge cigar, since a lot of people think that description doesn't make sense with the idea of a flying saucer. But actually, if you look at eyewitness reports from jet pilots of the time, they often did report them seeing as cigar-shaped, since while it might look like a saucer from the ground, it would probably look more like a cigar from anyone seeing it in the air. So yeah, as stupid as Plan 9 from Outer Space is, it did at least get one thing right. Anyway, Jeff thinks that the public ought to know about the flying saucer activity that's been going on for years, and he's pissed about how he's been sworn to secrecy about his UFO encounter. We then see a bright light as it flashes by their house, and it makes its way back to the cemetery. This light resurrects the freshly laid corpse of Bela Lugosi, who, again, looks pretty badass and scary. Seriously, that is a Dracula you don't want to bump into. He reunites with his wife, who seems to be suffering from a bit more decomposition, kudos once again to the artwork, and things quickly go south for Inspector Clay. Although, to be perfectly fair, the guy was going to keel over from a heart attack the next day anyway. The other cops quickly find his torn-up remains. Here's a question. Where do Lugosi and his wife go when they're not slowly stalking the cemetery? Suppose whatever we saw had something to do with this? Your guess is as good as mine, Larry. But one thing's sure. Inspector Clay's dead. Murdered. And somebody's responsible. Somebody really needs to get this guy in touch with Batman. Maybe he can answer some of those questions that have no answers. They radio for the meat wagon, and instead of seeing Clay's funeral, followed by the pointless yet still kind of cool "Saucers over Hollywood" montage, we see the flying saucer make its way to what is more clearly a space station than what we see in the movie. Honestly, if they didn't just outright call it Space Station 7, I wouldn't know if I'm looking at a space station or a poorly constructed home planet. It should also be noted that the aliens in the movie only look the way they do because Ed Wood didn't have the budget necessary to create the aliens that he really wanted to see, as we see here in Flying Saucers Over Hollywood, the Plan 9 companion. And in this comic, we see the exact same aliens as portrayed by regular people. Okay, so the artists probably couldn't conduct the kind of research that was done for the Plan 9 companion, but still, kind of a letdown. Although, they did make the leader's office a bit more elaborate than just a desk in front of some drapes, so I guess that's something. The leader is greeted by Tenna and Eros, who report that the government officials of Earth still deny their existence. I don't suppose landing on the front steps of Congress is an option, is it? You guys have to loiter around cemeteries in Californian suburbia that are so unkempt that they look like poorly made sets? They say that they're going to proceed with Plan 9, which deals with the resurrection of the dead by injecting electrodes shot into the pineal and pituitary glands of recent dead. And just like most of everyone else who's seen this movie, I can only help but wonder what plans 1 through 8 were. Alright, Plan 7 to take over the world with an army of mutant hamsters has failed. Apparently our mutagenic agents only made the Earth hamsters highly combustible. Let us proceed with Plan 8, trying to communicate via loose meat sandwiches.